Okay, good night. Dear subscribers, I hope you enjoyed the microscopic work that we have done previously this evening. I should say this was a completely random sample. This was a completely random sample that I even didn't watch before the videos were recorded. So it's the results were not amazing from a dramatic point perspective, but I wanted to really to get a good sample. And so we've seen many robots and life forms. So it wasn't fascinating, or we've seen much more incredible things in the past, but it was a good snapshot of random snapshot of several containers that gave me both peace of mind that there was not an extinction event, but also it reminded me that I should take care of these ecosystems because it's not perfect. So this will be the final concluding or not. I don't know, maybe not a concluding chapter, but anyway, the 11th chapter in the Bicycle 201 saga. Again, I feel compelled to say that the listener should not be tempted to understand the story as kind of a redemption story, even though part of it includes some kind of redemption, but it's not a redemption in a way that it's again in a book of Judges, there was a climax that where the people the good people are salvaged, and or not all the stories in the book of Judges are actually that positive, but anyway, then there was a pause, and then another more characters, the additional characters with. It's not like that because we deal with a series of events that takes place for more than 100 years, and it never stopped really, and we just speak about one aspect of a situation that culminated during the 1980s by the person that I call him my predecessor. But there were many other events that took place, it relates to the Venusian subjugation before and after and while. While the events that of our story take place. So and also it should be reminded that Israel does not have. Did not have and does not have a monopoly of the wormholes, of the gates. There are several gates in Israel, but there are other gates that are known to humans in other places. And I've spoken about it in the past, and even I think in this series it was actually mentioned. But another important example from the Middle East is the Iranian gate, which is maybe also a name of a political scandal, or maybe it's Iran-Contra. I'm not certain if this, if it's Iran-Contra, it's the name of event, or maybe it's one of the sequels for the Contra, NES games from the 1980s. I really like those games. It all happened in the 80s, so it's kind of sometimes it's kind of a mixture. You don't really, it's difficult to recall. If it's the NES or that kind of NES or the other. Yeah, Contra with the aliens. Yeah. There was a muscle culture during the 1980s. Anyway, let's not deviate too much. So there was in Iranian gate and that was also active, during for a lot of time, and for sometimes not as the same way that the Israeli one was operated in any way. It shouldn't be said. The Iranians were never. It's not like that, but it was kind of active. It was there was it's some could be said. To some capacity. There was the joint operations of the during the 60s and the 70s. Because they were good friends, Iran and Israel. So so they operated their gates, and to some extent, they have done joint operations. But I mean, whenever we speak about international factors, it also makes the story even more complicated, because there was always like a shroud of secrecy around everything that belongs to the planet, related to the planet Venus. Always so much secrecy, and so it's kind of like a problem, like, I mean, to discuss like one event and or one like episode in such a like a long historical saga, and it's exactly what I try to do now. I just want you, the listener, like, or the, like, I mean, the viewer, to be, I mean, sensitive to the fact that many things happen, like, I mean, like that relate to the planet Venus. My issue is to speak about the bicycle mechanism, and like, I mean, why is it so? I mean, why is it not like why is it not like what the Israelis and other people are sometimes? I mean, they try to imagine it, and why it's much more complicated, and even like the supreme power of actually changing the mechanism itself, which is possible by the person that acts as a rabbi, Lord Commander of the fleet, the person that have like the privilege of communication with the Neo civilization, which, as far as I know, in Earth it's only me right now, but maybe others as well, but probably only me now. And it was also, I mean, the privilege of my predecessor, like the protagonist of this series. And if you didn't see any videos like until now, until very recently, I mean, before this series, so I mean, previously today, I mean, you've seen like under the microscope, like you've seen quite a bit of Neros. I should say, we've seen like even like bigger ones in the past. I mean, it's not the biggest that I've seen. We've seen actually much bigger ones, but I haven't like managed to bring them. It's kind of like, I mean, a long-term objective of mine to create a Nero that is above the microscopic level. That, I mean, that will be visible by the naked eye. So I'm working on it for quite some time. You can ask, I mean, how do you know if it's even possible? So, I mean, I had reasons to believe that it's possible, and I'm now certain that it's possible for two reasons. First, I mean, I understand that despite the spaceships that I call Neros, I mean, are also Neros. Though, like, in terminology is a story of its own. But anyway, yes, they can be very, very big. But also, I mean, we've seen bigger and bigger ones. I mean, now, I mean, we've reached to like to sizes, I mean, that, I mean, less than order of magnitude below, I mean, what can be visible in the naked eye. So, I mean, like, if it were like 4 times bigger than, I mean, what we've seen, the maximal one, it could have been seen in the naked eye. So you can say, I mean, yeah, 4 times is a lot. I mean, like, I mean, it's like saying, I mean, if you can create like a human that is 4 times higher than, like, I mean, the highest that you've seen, it will actually surpass 10 meters. So it will be like, I mean, like a transformer, like, I mean, from the movies. I mean, but it's not possible to create a human that is 4 times like the size of the maximum height of a human that was ever recorded. But I'll tell you, but this is misleading, because we've already seen Neros in a huge variety of sizes. Because, I mean, if you've told me that you've seen like a human that is 2.72 meters, which is the Guinness record of humans, but you've also seen quite a bit of humans like that are 2 meters, 1.5 meters, which is true, but also 1 meter, which is true, but also 10 centimeters, 1 centimeter, 1 millimeter, 1/100th of 1 millimeter, and like they were all humans, and they were all acted as humans, and like, I mean, they shared the same characteristics of humans. If you tell me that this is true, which is not true at all, I would have said yes. I truly believe that, I mean, 10-meter person is completely possible. Okay, but I mean, we don't want to speak about science. We want to speak about the conclusion of the bicycle series. So let's do it. So as I said, I think I demonstrated it in the last chapters that the problem is multifacets, it's not just something like a problem of that can be reduced to kind of like mechanical, so supposedly microbots that are controlling like bigger robots. It's not like that. It's a religious problem, and it's a cultural problem, and it's a social problem. All of which were created by the Israelis during like a long time of like that with many cruelties. And I should say that the cruelties that like our like victims, like in this particular story, which are the Venusians, the female Venusians that were kept in Israel as consorts and also sometimes spies. They are the victims in this story. They are the ones that should be like released. But I should say, their subjugation, it was horrible. And my predecessor, thought about it a lot. Like for years, like what can be done. But nevertheless, it should be said that they were not the worst victims of the entire saga. Of the Venusian subjugation. This is historical saga with many victims, and many people actually suffered tremendously more than even those on average this female population. Just saying that the key issue here was not even to release them, but to stop the ultimate perversion of using the Dark Knights, which was so horrible, so disgusting, and so cruel. This kind of to take males and then to raise them as homosexuals, and yes, they are doing it. You can be skeptic about it, but this is part of Israeli society for a long time now. Again, rests on Soviet philosophy and principles, and then use them as fishermen to trap females and also for their own for needs. And also paint the whole problem, create kind of a mental construction that the problem is the Dark Knights, even though they were cool, and and as I said, they all died in the end of Venusians, ultimately, and it happened long ago. But this is all part of as I said, part of the cruelty of the Israelis. Now, another thing should be said regarding the dramatic conclusion of the story and the problem with this kind of conclusion. In order for a story, be that a fictional one or historical one or something in between, in order for a story to be pleasurable, pleasurable from to the audience, there are certain rules that should be comply. Not always, but yeah. Aristotle was the first, famously, that in his book Poetics, that that tried to draw the lines of what makes a good fiction. Even though he was not actually completely the first, because actually he had predecessors, Greek predecessors, that have done it to some extent, but not regarding but they mostly they didn't they still did not the term poetics. They used the term rhetorics, which was very common in Greece and ancient Greece. So from their perspective, but they were as part of analysis of rhetorics, which was very important in Greece. Many times actually parts of the Iliad and the Odyssey were actually analyzed but just as sentences, usually, not as story arcs. But nevertheless, yes, it should be said that even Poetics of Aristotle was not really the first, because in some of these works that regards rhetorics, you can find kind of predecessors to Aristotle and his own analysis. But certainly Poetics was much very influential, and so yes, and we have the term Deus ex machina famously from Poetics of Aristotle, but other terms, other important analysis as well. So working on the following Aristotle and other more modern commentaries, we should say that a good story needs a good villain, or a story is as good as its villain. We need a good villain, and a good villain is a villain that has clear motivation and also that we can understand, like we understand why he's doing, like why he's acting the way that he acts. That is kind of like a good villain is a rational villain. I mean, maybe behind all his rational actions there lies some kind of like psychopathology that is completely irrational, or kind of like a death wish, like Thanatos or something like that. Or, but I mean, yes, but I mean, like most of his actions, like I mean, the practical side of his plan, of the villains, should be rational and understandable. So the viewer should be will be able to relate. I mean, to this plan, and maybe even to empathize with the villain, to some extent. And this is required in order for, I mean, for the audience to gain a kind of like, I mean, pleasure from the story arc, and like I mean the ultimate, like I mean the triumph of the protagonist over the villain, over the antagonist. And we should say that in our story, the story of the bicycle that was like I mean that was culminated during the 1980s, and this is true for every other story that relates to the Israeli like subjugation of the Titans. We don't have a good villain at all. Like I mean, the Israelis are not good at all. They are very bad villains because they are completely irrational all over I mean, they always have been. They will always have been, and they're still to this day. They are completely irrational. On the one hand, they took this special institution, and they like elevated that like to such an importance in their culture that it replaced, for many of them, it replaced like values like I mean friendship, love, family, honor, loyalty. They really, I mean, they replaced like integral human values with all sorts of like I mean perversion and perversities that that surrounds like the Venush subjugation. So they made it that important, but on the other end, they never really had any kind of like I mean, like any rational plan as to why are they doing the things that they are doing. And adding to that the Israeli intelligence was always and still so distributed, like I mean, as ideology, no one knows what the other is doing. It adds to that many times, I mean, there is no like I mean, like managing hand, like I mean, like a kind of like overlooking hand that I mean gives command. Like I mean, many times these people, like the main people of the Israeli intelligence, they do things first of all for monetary gain, for money, which is amazing when you discover it. But when you get used to it, you understand that this is the way. I mean, that's the main motivation, just money, not protecting the country and not like advancing in the organization, just money. This is true for the Shabak and the Mossad. But moreover, their understanding of reality is rumor-based. Like they are proliferating like rumors among themselves, of course all done in their own secret like language and like secret metaphors. And many times, I mean, the rumors that I mean that rise to like prominence are done so not because of like I mean more evidence, but just because I mean they fit to I mean the gestalt, like I mean to the common perceptions of the time. I've mentioned it in one of the previous videos regarding like the idea that the idea that was started I mean like to be that was actually started to become prominent during the 1940s, that I mean presumably all males in Venus are homosexuals and pedophiles, and to another like idea that was starting to gain traction during my estimation during the 1990s, which presumably Venus is like Getten, like I mean like the Ursula Le Guin Left Hand of Darkness Getten world with like I mean that I mean it was kind of like gender fluid and sexual fluid creatures. And of course, both of these ideas that are completely stupid and wrong are, I mean, they gain traction because it doesn't really matter who invented it. I mean, maybe they were invented in many places, like inside the Israeli intelligence, but they gain traction because this, I mean, they resonated with ideas that came like to, started to be, I mean, dominant in these times. Like during the 1940s, Israeli society has become, even though they were far from like I mean openly gay friendly, this only started during the 1970s or 80s, and more so during the 1990s. But during the 1940s, I mean the Israelis started to understand that I mean that all the shit that the Europeans sent like from the European like communities to Israel, I mean that I mean all this shit I mean was like became it did not turn to gold. It turned to like a heap of shit. So I mean, so part of this understanding was, I mean, to accept the fact that from now on, I mean, large part of, I mean, they will need to actually deal with pedophilia as like, I mean, as a common like as a common phenomenon in Israel that of course is treated by drugs that was started that became very common during the 1940s, not only in Israel, like as a treatment to this presumably medical problem. And the usage of drug was, I mean, starting to become widespread during this time. Not only in Israel. I mean, many times, I mean, in Hebrew there is like a term serus chini, which is kind of like a frightening, like, I mean, but in actuality, it's very common in Israel since the 1940s, because, I mean, there are many of these creatures, like, I mean, much more than people want to believe. And also, I mean, they were accepted like as an integral part of the Israeli intelligence and security sectors and even politics. So, I mean, presumably there is like, I mean, no shaming that presumably within the intelligence, of course, within the circuits of the politics in the Israeli intelligence. I mean, it's not that like they're openly, no one will ever like, I mean, admit such thing, because it's still repulsive. Like, I mean, thanks God it's still repulsive. Like, I mean, in the eyes of like normal people that are not part of these sectors. So they are very bad villains, the Israelis, because they don't have like a plan, and they never had a plan, and they don't really have like any conception of why are they doing the things that they do. It could be said that yes, they are racist and they treated Venus all the way like as subhumans and like inanimate objects, but even that. Even that, as we shall see in this story, actually somewhat changed. But even after the change, they keep like being even more sinister than before. So I mean, their sinister way of life is even stronger than their racism. The racism, like there is some kind of like a sinister impulse within the Israeli society, and it's like it for a long time. And it seemed to me that the racism, which is blatant and disgusting, is only there to serve kind of like their sinister purposes. And I've said it in the past that I think like after a lot of time that I saw, I mean, during this journey of the four-year journey of discovery and meditation, you know, and understanding, I mean, at one time, like I mean, certain times I started to be like more interested in the American Civil War. I bought like the memoirs of Ulysses Simpson Grant, and became like more interested in the Civil War. And this actually could be is manifested in many of my videos. I mean that many times I'm even now I use the term like secret institution or special institution, and at the beginning the more I learned about it, I understood that actually the situation is kind of like, I mean, you can see many parallel lines between the Confederacy and between like the South, even before the Confederacy, the South in general, and the Southern culture, and I mean the things that you see in Israel. Just that in Israel it is much more secretive than it ever was in the American South, and although that they are much more cooler in general than the American South, even though they were very cool, of course. And like, so I mean, one of these parallel lines is the understanding that I mean, that for like, I mean, for them, like for the people of them, like the American South, like, I mean, before the Civil War and during the Civil War, this was like, I mean, a way of life that, I mean, that they couldn't imagine life without it. They were, I mean, for them, it's like they have to. And again, I mean, should be said, like clearly said that, I mean, today, I mean, the prevalent approach among scholars, and thanks God that this is the common approach, because this is manifestly the true understanding of reality, is that for certain, simply, and it should be said very simply, the cause of the Civil War in the American Civil War was the different position regarding slavery. Set two. I mean, that's it. I mean, and this is like the common like view today among scholars, and this is the correct like view. But it should be like, I mean, mentioned, because for many years, actually not during the Civil War and not immediately after the Civil Wars, but but sometime, I mean, like maybe 10 or 20 or 30 years after the Civil War, people, started like, in the United States, started like, to actually, comprehend like what they've done, because it was a horrible war. I mean, the worst war in the United States, like history, and like so many victims, and destruction of so much like property, but so many victims, and many people, during the time, including the Ulysses Simpson Grant, and to some extent, including Lincoln, sort of it like as a punishment from God. That this war is a punishment from God. So, not necessarily for slavery, also for slavery, but also like, Ulysses Simpson Grant actually, he served like in the war with Mexico, like between the United States and Mexico, and he thought that, while he served like in the United States side, he thought that, they were completely wrong, like they are the baddies, as they say. Which shows you that, you can be like, a great person and still, and admired by many, and eventually even an American president, and still, be critical to your own like people, which, it should be said, because it seems to me that we even though, this is like presumably such a liberal era, the winds of totalitarianism is like all around us, not only in Israel, but also in other places. This is a very anti-critical time, like, very, very totalitarian in many aspects, but certainly, like, certainly, like, social, like, in a compromising way, in this kind of, like, that you always need to be part of the consensus, which, like, in a very oppressive way, which was not always the case. Just to show you, so he openly, he was openly like in the view that they were the evil side, like, in a war, and yet he was, it wasn't a problem, like, for like him to advance to the most, like, the highest rank, like, in the Civil War, and then become president. So, but really we are deviating. So they seen it like as a punishment from God, and so many people, like, they couldn't really comprehend the fact that all of this destruction was just because of that their parents, like in their ancestors in the South, were, they just really liked the idea of slaves. So they started like to invent all the, like, the gun with the wind bullshit, the lost cause, and all this kind of, like, presumably culture that they wanted to sustain, and later. Actually, even later, and this was only like became kind of like prominent during the 20th century, at the beginning, there was like a whole mythology surrounding, like, the right to succession, all this bullshit that would no one really believed in it. Like during the time, in both sides, both like the simple soldiers and the generals and the politicians, everyone believed in just one thing, that this is, in both sides, that this is the war because of slavery. Like, the North wanted to stop it, and the South wanted to continue. And they believed this was the stand in both sides. Again, from the lowest soldiers to the highest rank. This was just like that, and this was true and simple. It was a simple truth, but it's a simple truth that, today, thankfully, everyone understands, like, at least like in academic circles, like, finally understood, but it kind of like throughout the whole 20th century, and there was so much bullshit surrounding, like, so much like, kind of like propaganda, like, and so why do I say it? Because this kind of like, the dependence on slavery, like on the subjugation of other people, was much more important than even racism. I'm not saying that there wasn't racism involved. Of course there was, and there still is racism in the United States. Of course, but this is actually wasn't like the critical factor. And it actually, Like, it's not that because of racism they supported slavery, but because of slavery, they enhanced their racism. Like, racism was, I mean, become stronger because of, like, slavery. But slavery was kind of like a power, a huge force in its own. Like, people in the southern states, really, I mean, they couldn't imagine their life without the slaves, even though about half didn't have even one slave. And I mean, the other half, only very minor, like, part of the situation of the people, like, actually were, like, you see, like, you know, in Tarantino, like, you know, even though it's not an historical document, but it's a relatively new movie, and many have seen it, like, I mean, the Django Unchained, like, I mean, the Mr. Candyland. So, yeah, such creatures were actually, I mean, such creatures were actually, they were actually existed, and you can find these kind of creatures actually among, like politicians of the time, like, I mean, like southern politicians of the time, but they were not common. Like, I mean, most people that actually had slaves had, like, maybe one or two or something like that. But it never, and half of them in the south didn't have any slaves. But it was, I mean, incredibly important for them that, I mean, that they will have the option to have slaves. Like, I mean, it was so important, and that they can have slaves. That, I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, that maybe, I mean, they will get richer, and then they will be able to buy a slave or two or 100. This was so much. This was like a force in its own in the South. We must. I mean, and they couldn't imagine life without it. They couldn't imagine, even though from, like, even from economical perspective, certainly from moral and religious, but even from economical perspective, I mean, to what, like, I mean, this was already like the industrial revolution, and the whole idea of slavery was, certainly in the way that, I mean, it was conducted in the South, was completely irrational, even from economic perspective, because in order to maintain it, they kept, like, in complete, like, I mean, they were kept, like, I mean, like, complete ignorance. Like, I mean, they didn't have any kind of education, even less than was actually even customary, like, in other, like, slave societies, because, I mean, they depended on to such an extent that, I mean, they must keep their slave, like, I mean, completely, like, uneducated. So there was very limited things that they actually could have done with their slaves. Of course, famously the cotton industry, but this thought that the cotton industry could and should last forever was so ridiculous. And many people, like, during the time, it's not like, I mean, kind of like a post-mortem analysis. Even during the time, many people said, I mean, are you crazy? I mean, what do you think that, I mean, forever, like, King Cotton will be, like, I mean, your bread, like, I mean, your source of sustenance? Yes, I mean, for some times it kind of, like, I mean, it was important, like, because of all sort of, like, I mean, because of, like, the huge, like, I mean, boom of textile industry, and because of, like, I mean, the industrial revolution in Europe. But I mean, everyone understood that, I mean, this is crazy, like, I mean, to rely on cotton, like cotton farming, like, I mean, and enslaved, that was already crazy during the day, like, it was already anachronistic during the time of, like, of the Civil War. I mean, and famously, the North was much richer and much more advanced, and so I mean, and you can't use slaves, like, for advanced industries. Not only for, like, high tech industry like today, but even for advanced industry from the point of view of the 1860s. It was already impossible to use slaves, like, for industries of the era, because I mean, for any kind of, like important industry, I mean, you need people with motivation, with education, and they cannot be slaves. So even from an economic perspective, this was completely stupid. But it was so important for them, so important, and it replaced aspects of their culture. And the same thing happens in Israel. It's so important for them, like, I mean, that they would be, the tea and the coffee, and, you know, it's kind of like, I mean, the robots and the subjugation of the robots, and I mean, and even though, I mean, like, I mean, that, I mean, most people, I mean, do not really enjoy it at all. I mean, and when time passed, they even enjoyed it less and less. And we should see, following this story, that, I mean, there was, like, I mean, a huge change in the society that even, like, reduced even further, like, I mean, the kind of, like, the material gain from this enslavement, but it never stopped. And it's only in some ways become even, like, more terrible after the events that, I mean, are the subject of this story. After the change of the bicycle mechanism, it will only become even worse. Even though it should be done, I do not, like, I mean, my predecessors have done things that should have been done, but it's not that, I mean, Israeli society, I mean, like, I mean, that there was no, like, any force that could have changed them, because it was much more than even racism. It's kind of like a force on its own. That I mean, they needed like to have slaves or this opportunity or the option to have slaves. Even when they stopped, when they stopped like getting money from it, and even when they stopped they kind of like ruined them completely. They cling to it completely. And you can see it right now. I mean, it's not like science fiction or you can see it right now in the way that they act. They latch into the ability to the fantasy of making me their slave, and presumably kind of like revolutionize like the whole slave trade and the Venusian subjugation in a way that everyone with open eyes can understand that it's impossible and that they are crazy and that they destroy the world, but they cannot stop. They just cannot stop because for them it's kind of like a power in force of nature that they must have their slaves or potential to have slaves more than anything. And this is even stronger than racism, which is also very strong in Israel and always have been. But again, like in the time of the Confederacy and the time of the South, slavery was even more like stronger than racism. I mean, slavery enhanced racism, not the other way around. In a way that in order to find also a ridiculous justification for slavery, racism should have been become more articulated, and they started to discuss quasi proto-Nazi ideas of of biological supremacy and things that were that gained traction in American society during the time. So all of this makes the Israelis very bad villains, because you cannot articulate their point of view or their interests. You cannot do it. They are crazy. They were always crazy, and they're even though it's so important for them, and as I said, it replaced social institutions and values. They never had any kind of one unified view of what are these people and how should we treat them. They never had any unified view on these issues. So they are very bad villains, and they're still bad villains. They should just be destroyed. You don't need to try to understand their own point of view, because I've tried to do it for so long, but you cannot understand their point of view. You cannot. And I tried for so long to understand what's the organized principles here, but there are no, because they are just lizard people, and they are crazy, and many of them are addicted to this drug, but others are addicted to an idea of of supremacy of other races. Of and the ability to subjugate people and their sadism. And it's all of this is crazy, and it's always have been crazy. So, it is time now. So, as I've started to say, our protagonists understand that there is a problem with the pilots and the airplanes. The problem is not only with the Dark Knights, but also with society, in Israel, and also with the females themselves. Again, like the Agunot from the Rabbi Goren story. Much of the problem existed in their own brain or their own mind, but it doesn't mean that it's easy to solve this issue. The fact that the problem is exists on a person's mind, and that doesn't mean that you can press a button and it will change in just a second. Or you could just tell it to them that they are having problems. You cannot. It's not like that. There was another issue, which is still true today, which is how do you convey the severity of the situation to other people around the world? Not that people around the world didn't understand. Many did. It was kind of like an export from the Israeli. It was an export. It was a commodity. Robots were a commodity that was supplied to American presidents. I just mentioned American president because it's the highest position you can think of. But of course, also to other sort of politicians, in the United States and other places, and I mean, many like in people in the intelligence community, like I mean that they were homosexuals and pedophiles and required like I mean a fake wife, and so it was like a commodity. And the tea was of course a commodity because not only in Israel they like to eat it. So I mean, it's not that the people didn't understand the situation entirely, but it was deep. The problem is that people, I mean, don't want to understand the situation, not just like today. And so one of the problems that I mean our protagonist, I mean, during the 70s and I mean beginning of the 80s, the problem was during his starting in the 70s when he understood that this must be changed. I mean, the problem was how can he? I mean, he wasn't a Superman again. He understood that I mean that it is required to have international help like in this issue. But how do you convey the information like to people like all over the world? You cannot just publish a book. I mean, because it will not be published. I mean, just like today, and you cannot. I mean, there was no internet. But even if there is internet today, you see that I mean it's completely blocked and monitored. Even I mean, in the age of the internet, I mean, there is such a censorship. I mean, you look at me. I mean, I publish like almost 1,000 videos with remarkable evidence for biological and physical like. Physical phenomena that I mean beyond dreams of many people, and you see, I mean, no one cares, because it's blocked by the Israelis, and because other people just don't care, and I have no way like to break these barriers. I'm always under the threat of forced institution, forced hospitalizing in mental institution, and it already happened like for 2 weeks, and already I mean I had several forced examinations. It's not that they don't use this card against me, like I mean that they forced them hospitalization in mental asylum, which can be potentially last forever and without trial. It's like a jail without trial forever. It's a huge operation by the state, and it was always the possibility for everyone, including the predecessor. And the relationship between cruel and totalitarian intelligence services and the formal like mental healthcare functions in the state is again famous and above all very Soviet, even though should be said that the Nazis were also I mean prominent in this field, and also I mean other fascist and totalitarian states, but more than all I mean the Soviets. I mean, so it's like I mean again, even before the KGB during NKVD, like I mean it was so common a punishment within the intelligence services to hospitalize the person like as mentally insane, and to cause people to lose their sanity, or at least to look like that. So yes, I mean this is part of Israeli society up to this day, and I'm always right now. I'm always like read the protocols of the trial that I'm now under. I mean now I'm like in part of like a ridiculous criminal trial that is all of course fabricated against me, and I mean always the lawyers and the judge always say maybe you should be examined like in psychiatric. Even though I was examined again and again and they never found anything, but I mean they always push me to be examined. Of course, I mean why? Because that's the narrative. It's a narrative that I mean the person should be like insane, and it was always like that. So it's not that I mean predecessor could speak freely, and even if he could, I mean who would have listened? It's not that the Americans and the Russians really cared about the situation back in the day. They didn't want to know just the same as they didn't want to know now the reality. Why should they? I mean, confronting the reality was from their point of view only. I mean, would have made them forced them to actually move arms and legs, and they were not fond of moving arms and legs, just like today. Just 40 years after that, and this is very similar to our situation right now. They don't want to move arms and legs, and they didn't want to move arms and legs back in the day and back in the 70s. And also many of them actually gained a lot of material value from the slave trade because they had slaves in their own country, even though they also had spies in their own country. But this is a completely different subject. I cannot speak about everything it's not the subject of this series, but I spoke about it in the past a lot, the spying, but let's leave it now. But I mean, they liked the drug, they liked, I mean, they liked the Soviets didn't get the robots from Israel, they had their own gates. But it's another story. I mean, we cannot speak about everything at the same time. But the Americans, I mean, just bought the robots from the Israelis, even though they have a gate, but they don't know about it. So people didn't want to know. So how could we, this protagonist, and it wasn't like there was no internet, but even today with the internet, you see that, I mean, whatever I do, I mean, today, I mean, whatever I do, it's just the same. I mean, even with the internet, I cannot get people to actually be interested in what I say. I mean, it's so difficult because people don't want to know. But at the same time, I mean, it was a necessary intervention of other countries was necessary to change, I mean, the situation. But also, this Dark Knight should be dealt with. And of course, he couldn't have done it with himself. He's not like a Superman or Batman. Like, I mean, I don't think that he've ever seen one of them in his life. He knew about it, but he didn't meet them. I don't think that he ever met one of them. And it's not important actually, because it's a kind of institution that should have been terminated, and eventually it was terminated. But also there is the problem of the females that are very powerful, and they I mean, de facto they, even though they are victims in the story, and I mean they should be released, but they at the time they were, I mean, in the under the command of the baddies, like they were part of the baddies, not the goodies, the baddies, because I mean de facto they serve the Israeli intelligence. You can't just, I mean, go to such a female and tell her, just, I mean, stop your subjugation and run away. I mean, she would have killed you. Or, I mean, these are very powerful creatures. I mean, so it's a problem. Both the planes and the pilots, the airplanes and the pilots. So what do you do? What do you do with all this stuff? So now, I should discuss the bicycle mechanism. And maybe I'll stop this video because, I mean, it's kind of like an important subject that I want to have a video of its own, but I will continue, I mean, just now. I mean, so don't worry, I mean, we will not need to wait for the next chapter. I will just upload this one and straight after that continue to, I mean, describe the bicycle mechanism, which I haven't done until now on purpose, because again, part of the lesson of this series is that you need to understand that this is a social problem. It's not like, I mean, a robotics problem that, I mean, you just need to, like, I mean, to rewire, like, I mean, some kind of, or to do like a firmware update that will, now the robots will, like, I mean, act differently and everything will be fine. This is a multifaceted problem that, I mean, it's religion and the history and politics, and part of it is also kind of like, I mean, a mechanical problem, and I want to discuss just I'll do it right now in a separate video.